Hi, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Antoinette. I'm the Director of Strategic Capital. I lead our grant-making function at the McGovern Foundation. And where I'd like to start today is to say, AI is transforming and impacting every industry we care about, whether it's climate, health, education, media, the list goes on. And you're all here today with some sense of responsibility for what role philanthropy has to play and how we're going to shape AI in ways that are accessible, equitable, and has longevity to create the societies that we all want to live in. At the Foundation, the way that we think about this is through a hypothesis-driven strategic lens. And so we think to ourselves, what are the gaps and where can we lean our support in ways that would be most catalytic? And then how do we ruthlessly invest in areas that will affect systems change? But that's not the only approach. And on stage with me, I have three incredible leaders who are each at different stages of investing and thinking about AI. So today we're going to have a conversation about what that looks like. And I'm incredibly privileged to present Pauline Fong, who is the Chief Program and Impact Officer at Murdock Charitable Trust, Anu Malipatil, the Executive Director at the Overdeck Family Foundation, and Marie Groark, Managing Director at the Schultz Family Foundation. Anu, Marie, Pauline, thank you so much for being here with us today. And so to set the stage, I want to think about this as a spectrum of maturity. We're all here in different stages of our journey. We're here to connect, to learn, to share our experiences. And Anu and Marie, I want to start with you both first, because you've been thinking about and investing in AI for quite some time. And I want you to share with us where is AI currently showing up in your strategy, and how have you transitioned from early experimentation to deeper portfolio-wide engagement?
Thanks, Marie, for having us, or Antoinette, sorry. So I'll just say, on behalf of the Foundation, we've been around for about 12 years. Since the beginning, we've been focused on enhancing education both inside and outside the classroom. And we started with the very simple belief that the education system is not working for most kids. And the pandemic made that even more clear, as evidenced by the recent NAEP scores. And with AI really changing the world faster than we can sort of even track, improving education and working towards better outcomes has just never felt more urgent for us. And so it really felt, sort of as you mentioned, Antoinette, our responsibility to figure out how to help it make positive impact for kids. So our current AI strategy is grounded in a simple but important goal, which is to understand what works to improve teaching and learning. So over the last 30 years or so, we've invested about $30 million to help 30-ish grantees to use AI in their own work, either to enhance efficiency or to improve programmatic impact. And we have funded about a dozen projects to help understand what works. We've been committed to sharing what we're learning along the way. And I will say, just as we started this work, a good entry point for us was to start with sort of pilots and some very specific use cases so that our team could build knowledge and understanding of what AI was capable of and in what circumstances it could work and in what circumstances it had more challenges, which was a good entryway then for us 12 months later to start making some investments in the critical infrastructure. So just more recently, we've made some investments in data sets and benchmarking work. And we plan to do more of that in the coming years.
Great, thank you, Anu. And Marie, before I get to you, I just want to dive a little bit deeper. We talked about this in the green room.
Yeah.
What was the thing that allowed you to transition from early experimentation? I feel comfortable now. I have a bit of a sense of how this works. To it's time to make deeper portfolio-wide impact. What was the moment that created that shift?
Yeah, honestly, it was sort of a landscape analysis that really drove that for us with our grantees. We have about 80 grantees that work in programmatic areas across from birth through 9th grade in education. And in those early conversations, we learned that almost every grantee was already thinking about integrating AI into their work. Some of them were clear about their goals, some of them were not yet clear, some of them had a lot of fears and questions, and some of them were already starting. And so it sort of felt imperative for us to go from sort of dipping our toes in the water to actually playing a more active role to help them be more effective at it and help them understand how to assess if it was working.
Right, that makes sense. Ears on the ground.
Yeah.
Maria, I'd like to turn it over to you. Please share your journey with us.
Yeah, happy to. So I'm at the Schultz Family Foundation. We've been around for about 25 years, and our mission is to create opportunity accessible to all. And our focus is the US and has long been on young adults. And we think about young adults ages 16 to 24-ish. And those young adults that don't necessarily go directly from high school to college to career, but have more of a meandering journey. For a long time, we focused and gave grants to organizations that were strong in mentoring or building social capital, that had training programs or other workforce pathways. We focused a lot on employers and thought about employers as a piece of the value chain and helping a young person climb that ladder and build the skills and agency that they needed to succeed. And a couple of things from all those investments started to come together about 2 years ago. One was there are great programs out there, incredible programs, but many of them struggle to find the young people that they need to serve. That discoverability of incredible programs is difficult, and it's difficult for the programs to find the young people and vice versa. The second thing that we saw was that this issue that we started to hone in of navigation is one that I think we've all known is difficult, but has been difficult to solve. And so perhaps we were just like defaulting into funding the programs because we weren't really sure how to solve this navigation challenge. And then the third thing we saw was the advance of AI. And we started to realize two things are true. One is that with the advance of AI, there is increasing urgency to get navigation right. That it is going to be that much more important for a young person, not once, not twice, but throughout their life, to be able to understand where and how to find the best next opportunity, whether it's in skill development, employment, education, et cetera. And the other thing that we saw was that maybe AI could actually solve this perennial issue of navigation. And so when we think about this area, I think of it as an area where there's not really like, is AI doing it better? Because for too long, folks have been relying on their quote-unquote Rolodex or a Google search. Like, it's been very, very difficult to find what is good. And so we decided, I think we talked to many people in this room, like built internal memos, and just decided to make a big bet on, we call them navigation tech tools. And I would say that these are AI-powered nonprofits that we decided to invest in. Now, you can imagine our trustees who are known for a coffee company. We are in Seattle, but we're not one of the tech mavens in Seattle. We're like, technology is going to be the answer. For so long, we believe in the power of human connection. Where and how does technology factor into this? And I think all of us in this room, and we even heard this morning, is yes and yes. We believe in the power of human connection, but we also know that there are not enough humans to go around at this point to give all the young people the connection that they need. And so where and how can we pair that with technology? So we started to build a portfolio, and I'd say a couple things have been true from that. One is our trustees constantly question us, and so we have built what I like to call a kitchen cabinet of, again, people that are in this room that we can go to ask questions. I think one thing we all know is that things are changing so fast that we cannot rely on just like one expert to help us, but we need to create a network of people, and maybe it's going to be all of us in this room together that we can go to, that we can ask questions, that we can be vulnerable with, so we can continuously learn as an organization. The second thing we did was just immerse ourselves as an organization in AI. So it's not something that we're investing in our grantees to do, but it's also something that we are using as an organization so we can understand where the promise and the pitfalls are. And then the third thing I'd say, and this is where it's been the most uncomfortable, is really thinking about direct service versus infrastructure or systems work. Our trustees love direct service, to be totally frank. They love knowing that their dollars are being used to help people. The idea of their dollars going to paying for reports or conversations, not as exciting. And so, but we also realized early on that we needed to be able to do both to have an impact. That if we just thought about how to invest in organizations that were doing direct service, we weren't actually going to have the impact that we wanted, and that we had to think about bending the hose of the LLMs so that they could be more effective partners in the work that we're doing. And I think that latter set of investments has been the most difficult for us to get through. And we were talking about this earlier because the timeline to impact is longer, and in some ways it's higher risk. But I think without doing both, we're not actually going to make the progress that we want to make.
Thanks, Maria. I think this is a perfect segue to Pauline, because you are experimenting, you're exploring, you're a little bit earlier stage in your journey, and it sounds like convictions have happened as a result of user feedback, thinking about your principles, what you want to do within your strategies. How do you explore and how are you being creative at this point in time, and how is AI showing up?
Yeah, so I work for the Murdock Trust, and I would say maybe with a bulk of the room, we're on the very, very early end of the journey into funding AI. And the Murdock Trust's mission is actually to build nonprofit capacity towards innovative and sustainable outcomes for human flourishing for the common good. So a lot of what we talked about this morning is what we're trying to do. But instead of funding programs, what we're trying to do is build nonprofit capacity. And so these days, with AI on the scene, I think if we don't really dive into funding AI, we're going to be missing out on really great opportunities to enhance innovation, sustainability, and all of that. But also, I think I did a little bit of search on how much granting we've actually done so far, and we've only really made 7 grants in the last year for about $4 million. It's only like less than 4% of our grant making. So because we wait for nonprofits to come to us for these AI-related projects, and I learned a new term, which is AI-assisted nonprofits. So really, most of our work has been around that, and less around even around infrastructure. Even those are questions that we're thinking about. And what I realized from this morning's conversation is basically then most of those nonprofits that come to us tend to be larger, and they have the internal capacity already to be thinking about this and working on this. That means more than 90% of the nonprofits that we're working with runs the danger of being left behind in the AI divide, and also losing that power that we were talking about this morning. And so I think it's really important for us to dive into this journey. And I would say there's 3 buckets of questions that we're asking at this point because we're so early in the journey. The first bucket really is around philosophical questions. So a lot of what we dived into this morning: ethics, bias, and actually I would add values alignment. So I think sometimes AI generates answers that are not necessarily values aligned to an organization or a person's values. So those are some of the philosophical questions we're exploring. And then second bucket of questions, I call them strategic questions. So where is it most strategic for us to invest? Versus just waiting for people to come to us with projects. Where are the strategic investments that we can make? We're asking questions about education. So if work connected, career connected learning is so important these days, what about community colleges? And are there AI programs helping community colleges be able to prepare people to have careers, and communities to be able to have access to that kind of careers? We're also asking questions around the environment, for example. So part of our funding is in scientific research. So instead of these big data centers that have negative environmental impact, are there ways that we can fund research or other alternative ways to be able to generate what we need still for AI to happen? So those are just some strategic questions we're trying to ask in terms of like, where do we fund and how do we make those decisions? And then the last bucket I would call really, they're really more operational questions, and we really talked about some of my questions got answered this morning through this morning's sessions, which is as we actually do due diligence as program officers and as foundation staff on projects that come to us, how are we actually vetting those? So we tend to be experts, right, in education, and we know how to think about that. We tend to be experts in housing security. We know how to think about that, but we don't actually know how to ask some of the questions around AI, the responsible AI, all of the questions that we had. I'm like, okay, I'm copying that, and I'm going to train my program officers in that as well. But we're also asking the questions of how much is really program officers able to do, and how much of it do we need to actually bring in experts, external panel reviewers, for example, to really think about some of that and to assist us. And how do we add value in the due diligence process for nonprofits so that we're helping them think about some of these questions? So we're already trying to sprinkle that into our programming. So we do grants, but we also do programs. So we do board leadership trainings, and so we're trying to sprinkle that into our curriculum to say, hey, let's do a session on AI governance policy. Most of the nonprofits I've worked with so far haven't even thought about that. Or to do a sprinkle in a session of how are you thinking about cybersecurity for your organization? So we're trying to sprinkle that into the programs, and we're trying to ask the question of, in addition to some of the broad educational webinars that we're in the process of rolling out, are there ways that we could add to the programming to really increase nonprofits' capacity, their capacity, their capability, their competence, their agility, their effectiveness around AI?
We're going to get into institutional buy-in. Even if an opportunity is compelling, there are always internal and external questions. Is it the right time? Is it the right maturity? Are we in the best position to start this now? And how big should we go? And I want to hear from you. How did you get your colleagues on board, your teams on board, your boards on board? That was a bad one. Anyways. But before that, there's this idea that's going from experimentation to action, and Pauline, I actually want to stick with you for just a second. Right now you're in experimentation mode, you're asking questions. What's going to help you pull the trigger to strategy, and how are you seeing that start to show up?
Yeah, great question. So I think part of the institutional buy-in, I'll talk about two things in particular. One is, in this last year, we've actually been internally as a staff getting upskilled in AI technology, because as our staff, like most people, there's a lot of hesitancy, fear, and some of those questions are actually very valid, like around bias and things like that. And so, but as we've tried to work on that, use it internally in operations, staff are like, oh my goodness, this is actually making me more efficient and more effective. We want our nonprofit partners to have that. So I think that has built the motivation of like, okay, let's figure this out. There are questions. So how do we actually build in parameters and prompts that ensures that you're not getting hallucinations or it's unsighted sources? So some of the basic trainings like that I think has been really, really helpful just to increase the motivation. And then through that, then, program officers are naturally now thinking about, okay, what kind of things are needed as we listen on the ground? So we're trying to employ a human-centered design in terms of listening to our nonprofits to say what's needed. And one of the things that we've heard, so one of the spaces we fund is actually rural clinics and federally qualified clinics. And one of the things that we hear a lot is we don't have the money to pay the staff, or doctors don't want to come to some rural area that has no people, you know? And so how do we provide access to healthcare then for that? So we're looking at it, we're in the planning stages. So we've done the exploration, we've done the listening, and now we're trying to do the planning and like, which consultants do we need to bring in? What experts do we need to bring in? How do we build a strategy and funding mechanism around that? Because then some of these rural clinics then can use the money that they have for the people work, right? So hopefully AI can do what AI can do for us, and then the human could do the human work. And so then these rural clinics can spend really the work on treating patients and being with patients rather than trying to fill out these reports and some of the other things. Or some of the innovations actually in healthcare with AI tools that can actually make the treatment times a lot shorter. How do they, but then nonprofits don't have the capacity or the funding to actually implement and adopt these tools. So those are some of the things that we're looking at in that initiative to figure out how do we fund and support nonprofits in being able to vet the tools, build the capacity for the tools, and actually adopt and implement it.
Thank you for that. Anu, you know a thing or two about investing in AI at this point and bringing on support for the work. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you've driven towards buy-in?
Yeah, I'll start by just saying we've been so lucky to have a trustee that really encouraged us to think about experimenting and leaning into the ways that AI could really improve teaching and learning for kids, partially because we sort of had shared a belief that it's here to stay. And so, as I mentioned before, it sort of was our responsibility to learn and understand the ways that we could nudge AI to be more effective for kids. We also have a team that's pretty forward, sort of open to change, excited about leaning into new things. And so most of our work, when we take on new work, it's sort of a test and learn approach. We want to sort of learn our way into things before we invest more over time. So we sort of started with a good set of foundations, to be honest. And then, to be honest, the next thing that we did actually, because what we normally do, we sort of try to get more proximate to the problem, and we sort of, I mentioned, start with our grantees who we know well, who can be transparent with us about what's working and what's not and what they're trying. And then the second thing was to learn from experts. So we did that, I think, in the summer of 2023 to start our first sort of, I guess, more coherent way of thinking about AI. And so we, in parallel, interviewed all of our grantees that we knew that were already thinking about integrating AI. We interviewed them to understand what their goals were, what they were trying, what was working so far, what their fears and questions were. And then in parallel, we built sort of a kitchen cabinet, like you mentioned. So we sort of brought together a kitchen cabinet of practitioners, researchers, investors to really challenge our thinking and to help us set up core problem areas that we thought were relevant to our work and would be well suited for AI. So we started there. We had a small budget to start. We had a couple of areas we wanted to invest in. And we sort of committed that we were going to sort of test and learn our way into it. And so a year in, we shared some of our key lessons and insights with our board, and they encouraged us to keep going. So that was sort of just a slow and steady path to getting more involved in it.
And is this where you set up the advisory council we had spoken about?
Yes.
Yeah, tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, I mean, we just knew that we didn't know a lot, and we felt like the best way to build the buy-in with our board and with our leadership was to really make sure that we were borrowing the key insights from people who spend their career thinking about this. So we brought together sort of a group of almost 10 individuals, a few folks who had started thinking about innovative methods for understanding and the impact of AI, a few folks who have been thinking about already in the practitioner seat, thinking about how to apply it, and we're already on the leading edge of that, and then a few folks who had been already investing in it for quite some time. So getting those perspectives really sharpened our thinking. We actually had our board join for that session as well, and that, I think, also created additional buy-in.
Ray, I'm going to turn to you. You're welcome to answer that question around buy-in. I'm also curious if you feel like there's anything that's missing or there are questions that are still outstanding that you haven't quite been able to answer yet.
Oh my gosh, so many. I think when we think about both the buy-in question and the what don't we know, I think one thing we have an orientation towards, and I think we all need to, is this idea of testing and learning, and like with the emphasis on learning. When I think about who we've invested in as a foundation, who our grants are to, obviously they've got great strategies and they have great products, but the most important thing is an orientation towards learning, because this world is changing so fast that we have to be open-minded. We have to really think about what's the right leverage point for philanthropic capital. Like, what should we be investing in that can make the biggest impact? And I think that's a question that we ask ourselves every day. I don't think we've come to the answer, and I bet there are folks here who have good ideas of what it should be, but that's something that we're constantly thinking about. The other thing is making sure that our grantees, and we set up a relationship with our grantees, and I really liked what you mentioned about getting real feedback about what's working and not working. One of our grantees is Steve Lee at Skill Up, and I just love their approach because I think they'll write a white paper about what didn't work as opposed to just touting what worked. And I think that is what is so critical because that is what is going to help us get smarter. I would love a time when all of us could just spend a session saying, and here's the huge impact we've had with AI, here's the huge impact, and I think right now we're still in the, hey, I think we're seeing something, as opposed to there's been major shifts in terms of improving economic mobility in the US because of AI. I think the one other thing that I would note is how do we actually create these learning moments as a team, including our trustees and everyone on the team? And then how do we create opportunities for the same things among our grantees? We as funders are so lucky to be in spaces like this. Adam Goldfarb, who I know is here, he helped to create something called, I think it's Opportunity AI, which is like AI in workforce. Those monthly sessions are so incredible. Like, I get better because I am able to listen or to attend those. How do we give our grantees that same exposure to learning? I think I heard earlier today this idea of creating a space together to collaborate and learn. And so we're very interested in starting a grantee learning network among career navigation, AI leading nonprofits, knowing that because the technology is changing so fast, can we create a space for them to feel comfortable enough collaborating with one another so that they're not trying to do this on their own. They're learning together, and we're able to connect them with the experts that they need. And I'm sure we're not the only ones thinking about that. I'm sure folks around here are thinking about that in their areas. But that just seems so critical of just changing the funder-grantee dynamic so that they don't feel they have to give us a certain answer to get more funding, but that we are incentivizing the learning and the collaboration first and foremost.
Thank you for that. I've heard, I actually had the chance to sit with Adam at the table earlier, and some interesting concepts have come up with the idea that this is first loss capital. It's where we, as funders, are able to enable early experimentation and sense making. This is an event and an opportunity to do just that and to exchange ideas and start to think about ways that we might be able to work towards a common solution together. But I want to turn over to you, Pauline, and see if there are other things that have come up that you're still struggling with, or where your next direction of questioning is targeting towards.
I have a suspicion that being here is going to help me answer a lot of my questions. So, I mean, even this morning, right, I had a whole pool of questions around what are the questions we should be asking, and you all provided a whole list of questions. And so I just think coming to things like this, they didn't pay me to do this, by the way, but coming to things like this really actually helps to educate ourselves, and then I'm going to turn around then and work with my staff and our board to say, hey, this is what the conversation is out there, and I think there's a desire to adopt AI because I don't think anybody can ignore it these days, but I think the biggest question is about how do we do this well? How do we do it in a human-centered way? How do we do it in a values-aligned way? And I think those are some of my questions still is some of the operational questions I think we could tackle, and then strategy questions, I'm like, oh, I learned a lot here already. Probably the philosophical, like, how do we work on the values piece around are the results that we're getting and are the ways that we're doing it aligned with the values that we actually hold, and how do we do that? So I think those are philosophical, but they're pretty important because they inform your strategy and your tactics and on how you go about it. So I think those are still a pool of questions that's swirling in the back of my mind of like, then how do we align this to that piece then? Or if we do this, then it raises this question about this value. So those are the things that I'm still thinking about.
Great. Okay. Let's get tactical. Anu, let's start with you. What are some of the, I'm going to ask this question to each of you, frameworks, principles, heuristics, guidelines? Jackie led us through a really nice session earlier today. What are you using to help you guide decision-making specifically in your programming?
Great question. So we are pretty disciplined about starting with a core problem. And we start with understanding, is this problem well suited to be addressed by technology, and then more specifically AI. And if we think that that is true, we sort of look at the specific use cases that we're focused on where we think there's a high degree of promise, and we'll sort of prioritize from there. When we look at individual grant opportunities, we really sort of try to hold ourselves accountable to one of sort of 3 E's, we call it sort of internally, the 3 E's framework. The first is efficacy. Does it help students learn more? And because we're just focused on teaching and learning across the organization, that's sort of a core premise or question that we care about. The second is efficiency. Can it scale effective teaching and learning at scale at lower cost, which we know is a core value proposition. And then the third is expanded capabilities. Does AI or technology, in this case, enable something that wouldn't have been possible otherwise? And if we think any of those 3 E's are relevant or possible, then we will take a look at it and conduct diligence. We sort of apply our more general than funding criteria and funding principles to take a look. We usually start with small pilot grants. We set metrics and milestones. We make sure that we have baseline data to frame the problem. We try to work with grantees to set concrete goals so we can understand what's achievable over a specific time frame. And then we also try to look at grantees sort of individually and collectively, or opportunities. Sort of, will an opportunity help an existing grantee do their work better? Does it fill a market gap? Is there an opportunity that it could actually make our existing or new work, make new work possible that we haven't thought about? And so then the last thing I'll just say is that we think about what you shared, Marie, which is that we look for organizations that are truly sort of curiosity-driven and learning-oriented, because we just know at the core of this, the R&D mindset, the curiosity, the willingness to test and learn, and the humility to acknowledge when things don't work, just as much as when things do work, is just critical for this work to be possible.
Marie, I'm going to ask you a flavor of that question. Anu, I like where you started, where you said, is AI the right solution for this problem? Is it even applicable? Some of the things that you've mentioned are diligence questions that apply to all kinds of theories of change, not just ones that pertain to AI. What are some of the frameworks that you think are really AI-specific and helpful in that particular context?
Hopefully I can answer the question. When we think about AI, as I mentioned at the beginning, we think about it in 2 ways. One is the external pressures or urgency that AI is creating, and then the second is AI to actually improve service delivery and the problem. And I think there's 2 kind of different frameworks that we use depending on which side of the equation that we're trying to solve. So I haven't really talked much about the former, the sort of like the external pressures. When we think about the pressures that AI is putting on our economy, then we want to make some big bets in terms of how to solve that. And so there, our diligence is as much about the sort of the track record to date and the expertise of the individuals involved, and or who else is at the table, and that helps us with those. So an area that we're very interested in is labor market insights. Our labor market data in the U.S. is poor at best. It's very strong looking backwards. I think someone at AEI once said, we have excellent taillight data. And so we could tell 5 years from now all the disruption that has happened because of AI. But if we really want good data that helps us better predict moving forward, that then we could share with community colleges, with governors, with workforce leaders, we need to get stronger at thinking about it that way. And so we've looked at folks that we can invest in that have good expertise in the area, a strong framework, and then also a connection and reputation with the audiences that need to be moved by this data. So that's one side of it. So then when we look at the other side, the actual service providers, I think we historically have not been early stage funders. I think there was a time when Schmidt Futures was around and they were always funding very early stage folks, and I was always okay, let's see what they've got going on and we'll do the round after them. that's harder to kind of like keep that line in this day and age, but some kind of track record is important to us, that there's some suggestion that they understand the audience that they are serving and they're able to reach that audience, and they're using both as a way to design the product is very important to us. And then the last thing is exactly what I said earlier, which is that they are strong learners, that they are continuously updating and changing how they're thinking about their technology, so that they're able to leverage it in a way that has impact.
Thanks for that. Pauline, as you're doing your exploration, are you starting to see some frameworks emerge, or are you pulling from other frameworks that you've seen in the space? Share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just built our own impact evaluation framework of how do we actually know that we're building nonprofit capacity, right? How do you actually know you're doing that? And actually, it's very similar to yours.
I love how Pauline's just like, yeah, we built it.
Well, it's taken like a year and a half, but we're actually, we built it, but we're actually in the piloting testing stage, because it's the whole, actually this is using the human-centered design type of process, which is you want to make sure you're listening to all the different interest holders, not just from our mind of what we think should be done, but all the different groups of people that are actually involved in that problem, and really listening and creating something and then testing it, do a prototype, make sure that it's actually what you think it is. Mostly it's what we thought it was, but there were a couple of things where I think we need to adjust that, right? Like,
Stop there. What was that? what needed adjustment?
Well, I think some of the language, right? So sometimes I think as funders, we have language that we think it means what it means, and then when our nonprofit applicants and grantees and they hear it, they're like, huh? Like, what are you talking about? And so we've had to really adjust some of the language. So it's not the content, it's more about the language. Does this convey what our applicants and grantees and nonprofit partners are trying to say? And so our framework is very similar. So are we helping nonprofits become more capable? Are we helping them become more effective? And are we helping them become more agile? So those are kind of our three domains that we're trying to figure out, okay, is it actually doing that? I would say this morning raised a really interesting question for me around power. And how do we build that then into our framework? So now I'm like, okay, now I got to go back to the drawing board, because you now give me a whole other pool of things to think about. And so I think we do a layering of the human-centered design and our framework.
Yeah, pulling some iteration into that to make sure that it stays relevant.
Yeah.
Let's do a two-part question. I'm going to ask each of you the same one, which is, looking back, what might you have done differently? What's some tips and tricks for other funders in the room, that some words of wisdom? And then looking forward, what are you paying attention to and anticipating? Anu, we can start with you.
Yeah, I think looking back, I wish we had spent more time up front developing a really sharp point of view about AI and where we actually wanted it to be integrated into teaching and learning versus reacting to it. I think having a more proactive, positive vision of how AI could impact student outcomes positively would have helped us better understand, kind of to invest in the future we want to see versus reacting to what we're seeing happening on the ground. So we sort of started instead with, let's shape a strategy, let's get perspective and input based on what's happening, and then learn and test our way into it. And we sort of developed the point of view over time, to be honest. So I think I would have started just a sharper point of view earlier on, and then use that point of view to sort of update it constantly.
Based on how you developed your point of view and based on how you would have done things differently, what would you have done differently?
I think I would have actually spent some time with the team and with experts trying to predict what we actually think AI could look like 3 to 5 years from now in a classroom and in a school, and try to paint the positive vision of that. Okay. We still haven't done that yet, but it's on our list for 2026 to just get sharper about what do we actually think would be good for kids and for schools and for teaching and learning, and try to interrogate that with experts.
Okay, so besides that,
yes,
in 2026, what are you looking forward to? But you can't use the same answer.
we actually are starting to do some work with some folks in their room around investing in AI talent to help nonprofits to better build their own internal capacity. We're about to make a few grants, hopefully in the next month, on additional data set and benchmark work, building on some of the work that you all have already done. So I feel like there's more infrastructure investments to come, and then we really are excited to figure out more innovative methods for understanding how to assess the effectiveness of AI, given the rapid pace of change. There's a few other funders in the room who are thinking about that, so we've been partnering with some of them and hope to really sort of get a clearer point of view of what we actually can do there.
Marie, I'll turn it over to you now, but if you want to do a plug for those benchmarks, now's the time.
So I think I'd say first the biggest lesson learned is, and I feel like I've learned this before in my life, and now here I am again, is that last mile of delivery, like that last bit. We funded Career Village, which is a very forward-thinking AI nonprofit. And then we paired them with local nonprofits to say, can you take the chatbot or the tools that you're developing it, and then work in partnership with these local nonprofits to get them into the hands of the young people and the navigators who need them. That is very difficult, right? And I think to everything Pauline has said today, how do you really get folks on the ground to trust the tools that you're developing? There's a significant disconnect there. And so we can be in love with the technology, but we have to really think about how are we actually bringing it all the way home. I feel like Gates Foundation Global Health learned this lesson years ago on vaccine delivery. It's like we should probably all read all of that and think about it. In terms of things that we're excited about, I think to that point, when we look at the data, young adults are the biggest users of LLMs. And so, yes, there are the intermediary adults that are, or nonprofits that are a little bit more hesitant. But as young adults go directly to LLMs, how is it that we can bend the hose or shape them? So we have an investment that developing career benchmarks that can be used to help to train LLMs so that they're actually better at giving navigation guidance than they would be otherwise. And the idea that if that is successful, all boats will rise, the nonprofits that are designing sort of bespoke interventions on top of those LLMs will be that much better. And then young people who go directly will be that much better. That's a huge bet. The second thing that we're excited about is really thinking about the data investments. We have, for the last 3 years, published something called the American Opportunity Index, which helps to understand which companies are the best at creating mobility for their workers. We, this year, are going to make that available through an MCP server so that you don't have to go to a website to see that data, but that data can be integrated in, whether it's through LLMs or other other data sources or sites, et cetera. And so we're really excited about that and really think about this idea. Our family office, the name is EMIS, which means truth, and really thinking about the role philanthropy has in developing data sets with integrity that can actually move the ball forward, as opposed to relying on the scraping that the LLMs are doing of data sets that we already know have inherent biases. And so what role can we play in that regard? So we're excited to see as we start to move into that space in 26 where it will take us.
That's great. Pauline?
What do I wish I would have done? Actually, I wish as a leader I would have taken more time. Not that I had time, but I wish I had taken more time to really think, take a step back and do more thinking around AI. If I could get in a time machine and go back another 12 months, that's actually what I would do. So in this last bit, I just took what I've been learning in the last 18 months and I plopped it into a vision roadmap for the next 3 years. I was like, I probably should have done that 12 months ago. I should have probably, if I could do that, I would totally do that. And right now, I'm actually taking that draft and vetting that draft with a whole bunch of interest holders, with tech people, because I'm like, I don't know that much about tech. I have a vision, but is this actually even achievable, right? So there are things that we want to happen, but then we got to draw people, consultants and experts into that process. So I wish I would have done that earlier. But I needed to actually create that vision and roadmap first based on what I was listening to and what I was learning. So if I could speed up the learning and divide myself in two and be able to be in two places at the same time, I would love to be able to do that.
And then going forward, what are you thinking about?
I think I've already talked about a lot of the things that we're thinking about. So I'm really excited about what AI can do to help us love people better. So I want to figure out how we can think about that,
Love
right?
that.
Versus just how to be more efficient.
Yeah. Anna Marie, Pauline, thank you so much for so candidly sharing your journey with all of us. What I hope is the through line from the conversation is that there's no single playbook. We're each at different journeys and stages of thinking about AI and incorporating it into strategy. That being said, we do share a common challenge, and that's why we're all here, is because we have and feel that we have a responsibility to shape AI in ways that support and reflect our mission and our values. And so whether you're tech forward or you're just at the beginning of your journey, the invitation remains the same. Use this time together to think about AI as a cross-cutting force and something that we can shape, and ideally that we can shape in conversation with each other. You've heard about urgency today, and I guess I'll just say it again. This isn't something we can afford to sit out. The opportunity cost is really much too high. And it's not something that we can do in silos. And so I appreciate everybody here for coming. I appreciate the three of you for sharing your thoughts with us. And I wish you that you continue to enjoy the programming today. Thank you.